All right, excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. We're a couple of minutes over, just figuring out some technical difficulties. But welcome everybody. Welcome to Cultivate Your Students' Voices. I'm gonna preface this workshop with I'm very much used to working with much younger, smaller humans. So don't mind if I ramble on a little bit. The webinar slash presentation model is relatively new to me, so don't mind me on that end. But welcome. I hope everyone's having a lovely weekend. So let's jump into things. I wanted to get started with this quote. Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which man and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of the world. So that is quite a mouthful, but I think it's a pretty apt quote for what everyone here is trying to do in terms of culturally responsive teaching, in that, you know, we have this system that we're used to and that we're a part of, and we're now currently at this amazing crossroads where we're trying to really bring apart this reform to education, and we're trying to not just include everybody, not just disenfranchised groups, but we're trying to really transform it to this point where children can thrive and become independent learners and become, honestly, these amazing, productive citizens of their own right. So I just think that's this wonderful, beautiful time that we're in. And I wanted to share that with you. So today we're going to just go into a little bit about CRT, why we should apply it, creating an open environment of support. That's a really big one for me. I think that once you have established your students' trust, and once you've established this free-flowing, amazing kind of, you know, I can talk to you about anything, you can create a lot of really amazing things, and it really breeds this environment of innovation. So that's going to be a big focus. And I also specifically set up this workshop so that all of the things that I'm introducing can be done both virtually and in-person teaching. Just because everything that's going on right now, I know there's a lot of back and forth. In New York City, we are currently in this weird on and off type phase. I'm actually teaching in person at a project-based learning school called the Portfolio School to first and second graders, and that's great. We're in person now, but we're also basically every day planning on what we need to do if we need to go back to virtual. So all these topics, all of these tips, all of these processes are able to be done both digitally and in person. So that's our open environment. We're going to talk about digital design and visual mediums, computer science mediums, and physical mediums. So what is culturally responsive teaching? I'm not sure if any of you attended the keynote, but it was beautiful and just far more eloquent than I could ever attempt. But let's go over it very quickly. So culturally responsive teaching is a research-based approach that makes meaningful connections between what students learn in school and their cultures, languages, and life experiences. These connections help students access rigorous curriculum, develop higher level academic skills, and see the relevance between what they learn at school and their lives. So why should we apply it to the STEM classroom? My big answer for that is to create independent learners. So traditionally in culturally responsive teaching, we really talk about how students that come from different cultural backgrounds they tend to become dependent learners. And these are students that are perhaps just learning how to speak English, or from just totally different cultural norms than what they're being introduced to in the classroom. So of course they're going to need a lot more hand-holding, a lot more support than an independent learner is going to need. But our goal is to make all of our students into independent learners. So this is actually taken from a paper that was published a while ago, but it was a big focus on how to teach students that are learning English, so our initial English speaking students. And I think it really has a good application in today's day and age, dependent learners versus independent learners. So dependent learners rely heavily on the teacher. They cannot make decisions about their learning. They do not know their own strengths and weaknesses. They do not connect classroom learning with the real world. They think that the teacher is wholly responsible for their learning, and they do not know the best way to learn something. Independent learners are self-reliant, can make informed decisions about their learning, are aware of their strengths and weaknesses, connect classroom learning with the real world, and can take responsibility for their own learning. And they know about different strategies for learning. Now, I want to sort of add a caveat to that. So I think that that's not just a modern day issue that exists, like this independent learner versus the dependent learner. For example, I think back when I was in elementary school, we didn't really have that autonomy. We weren't really asked to take our education into our own hands. But now we're sort of shifting our educational focus to acknowledging that students do have a lot of power, they do have a lot of capabilities. You know, we can give them these deeper, more meaningful tasks, and they will work them out on their own if given that chance. So this is definitely not just a cultural reflection. It's also, you know, a sign of the changing times. Like we are definitely far more malleable in terms of how we teach our kids and what we expect from our kids. Okay, so what do you care about? We're going to do a super quick activity, and I would like for you to either, you can draw it on the screen if you want to annotate, you can say it in the chat, or if you would like to shout it out, whatever you want. I just want to know, what do you guys care about in general? Not as teachers, but just as human beings. It can be your students, obviously. I care about my students, so. But I'm curious, what do you folks care about? What is a big get for you? Work-life balance. Yeah, that's a tough one, especially now. I think with everything going virtual, it's sort of hard to disconnect. I actually do want to comment on that in terms of the student's perspective. I spoke with a child who is going into fourth grade, and I asked him honestly, uh, what did you think of this transition to virtual? Like, honestly, what did you think of school? Were you able to focus? Do you feel like you got a lot out of your systems, your education, your classes? And he said, I mean, you know, I could sort of focus, it was fine, but the problem was that I would get on the computer in the morning and then I would be done in the afternoon, but then the day just still felt like school. Everything just still felt like there was always more work. And I thought, wow, you know, that is a tough thing for a fourth grader to go through, you know, that already that separation of work-life balance. Like he's 9. So that's definitely an in interesting perspective. But I love this. Yeah. Oh, and so Yvonne Teveno is here and she's amazing. She's actually one of the catalysts for what got me into pushing for culturally responsive teaching and other things. So hello. Amazing. Quality conversations, amazing. These are all really great things to care about. The reason I'm asking you is because I want to shed a focus onto what kids care about. So they're going to have actually similar answers to us. And that's sort of why I brought up the work-life balance thing. So kids care about their family and friends, that's obvious. Kids do care about the world, even little ones. But what I thought was really interesting too is that kids these days are just far more invested in their community than I think our current system allows them to interact with. Like they are super aware of what's going on in the world. I spoke with a student in one of my app design classes who was really concerned about the infrastructure in his neighborhood. Like he noticed that all of these bridges were not being worked on, and it was not just like, oh, this is a rough neighborhood. It was that the bridges were literally falling apart. And he said, you know, I noticed that there's always a lot of work being done in all these other neighborhoods. So why, I looked it up. Why has this not been worked on in 12 years? So that's, I thought, a really interesting point and something that we should sort of focus on. Like what are these things that these kids are noticing that we can actually bring out from them and then focus on? So that is sort of the reflection of that. What are our kids thinking about and how can we support them? And this goes into, like I said, this young man who noticed what's going on in his community. Younger kids who say like, "Oh, there's businesses in my neighborhood's closing now." That's just what life is. They're noticing these things. They're picking up on these things. So I feel like it's our job to take that with them and then help them figure out how they can make changes to the world around them with it. Okay. So that's kind of like my brief overview of everything. Thank you for letting me ramble. So I think the biggest part of creating an environment that will allow culturally responsive teaching to thrive is you need to build open and welcome and this environment that promotes self-expression and allows for innovation. So I'm going to talk about a few ways that that can be done. Ooh, that was a bonus slide. So here are like the 3 steps that this is basically what I think everything kind of falls into. So be available. It's pretty straightforward. Provide a platform and utilize outside resources. So I'm going to break these down a little bit more for you. So the most common practices that I've been using both in my virtual and physical classrooms are to start with entry surveys, check-ins, use open-ended questions and initiate community discussions, have private journals and or a commenting system, a preset check-in system, use forums, and have mindfulness and reflection time. So to break these down a little further, the entry surveys. So I realize that we're sort of, I guess, halfway through the first semester of the school year, but these are definitely still practices that can be done now. Entry surveys are really interesting because they kind of allow you to get to know your student before you see them, or before you interact with them. A lot of common questions you'll see on these like more advanced entry surveys will have to do with learning processes and how the student themselves view them as a student and how they view themselves as a learner, which I think is can provide a lot of really meaty resources for you as a teacher to kind of plan out how you're going to teach this classroom. For example, if you have a lot of kinesthetic learners, perhaps you can adjust your curriculum to include more hands-on projects. If you find that you have a lot of people who are very enthusiastic about reading and responding in that sense, then absolutely you can load them up with more interesting articles, make sort of a community book club or a community article and news response club, things like that. So entry surveys are a really great way to not just round out your students, but to also let them know before you even see them that their education is your priority. So you have them in mind as you are entering the school year. Secondly, open-ended questions and community discussions. So start the class off with a question meant to drive discussion. It could be something topical and deep or something silly and fun like, would Batman or Iron Man win in a fight? So I love this one. I love this one for older students and for younger students. During the summer, I actually, with Dr. Tevino, was teaching an app a creation class based on social justice issues. And I found that, when I was going in, this was a new concept for me. So I wanted to really, really round out my students and really figure out, what they cared about, what made them tick. And I found that starting off my classes with just a question and encouraging sort of a round robin type discussion really not just opened them up, but sort of gave me a perspective on, where they were angling in life and where they were angling in terms of their project. So that is just, honestly, it's just such a quick, easy tool. I think that with open-ended questions like that, it's important for older students, especially, to ask difficult questions. Ask them questions that they might not necessarily have an answer to in the moment, but will cause them to stop and reflect and take a look at their own life and say, well, I don't really know a lot about this, but I kind of feel this way. I just think it's a really great way to promote that reflection. So yeah, let's go to reflection then. So for mindfulness and reflection time, budget a small amount of time for students to reflect on their work or thoughts for the day. I think this is a really important practice to start, especially when you're in like an engineering, making tech type environment, because it's really easy for students to have a lot of things thrown at them at once. But when we are talking about culturally responsive teaching, again, the end goal is to create independent learners. So if you're having them take a moment to stop and reflect on what they've been doing and what they've been achieving, they have this really tangible, timeline of, oh, so I started because, my teacher asked me to build a wheelchair ramp for the school, but I have no idea even how to do that. So I started to research, and then, I found out that there's this really cool method that is actually pretty easy to apply on the concrete we have in front. And then I started researching what kind of builds use the materials that we have access to, etc. So having them reflect what they're doing each day, and this also ties into keeping a journal, is just a great way for them to take more agency over their education. They're actually getting this tangible product of, I started not knowing this thing, and then here's my entire thought process, and I now have this amazing completed object or project or whatever. But it's really encouraging, and I think it's something that even adults can benefit from a lot. So yeah. Okay, finally, I found this process out from Thurgood Marshall in New York City, and I think it is just this incredible system. So what they do is they have a mental health check-in system. So every day the students, well, there's like 4 quadrants and there's 4 different colors. So you're either on the red, the yellow, the green, or the blue. And the green will include things like tough or sick or angry, and the yellow will have sunshiny and happy, etc. It's like a mood reader, yeah, and it's amazing. But even for the younger, like I worked with their second graders, and the second graders every day would say, I'm on the green because of this, I'm on the red because of this. So they're starting out their educational day by stopping and checking in with themselves. And I think that is just so important, because then they know they're going into class in whatever mood they're in, or they might have some sort of bias for the day. Like, you know what? I don't really feel like trying, but maybe it's because I'm on the green and I was grumpy because I didn't get enough sleep. And that, again, goes back to giving them such agency. And I think it's a fantastic thing to do. Open forums, again, are a really important way to cultivate that sort of supportive environment, but also to allow the class to build their own identity. So create a class forum that can be used for on and off topic discussions. Encourage participants by asking the students to share their opinions on the topics, not just a rehash of the material. So again, this goes back to really pulling the personality out of your students. Like, yes, it's very easy to get a reading response out of a kid, but it's a little bit tougher to get that kid's opinion. But that's what we should be focusing on a little bit more. Reviews are simple, but reviews with, well, I honestly think this about it. That's how you get these critical thinkers. Yeah, so I'm actually gonna take a peek at the comments because there's a lot going on here. Yeah, so the mood meters are great. And in the high school classroom, I think that you can you don't have to use, obviously, like the colors is a very younger student friendly type thing, but the zones of regulation, fantastic. Polls at the start of the class are great. I think with high school students, you can also get a little bit more abstract. Like maybe you can just create an open form and say, like, use 2 words to describe your mood today. That's a little bit more in depth, but also allows them to stop and take a think about it. Yes, it's ruler. I have a link to that in the resources too. All right, so I'm gonna jump back over here. So check-ins, just in general, these are super important. Hi, how are you doing? Class, how are you doing? Make sure that even if your kids are looking fine and they're good to go, just a little check-in is really important. And finally, and this is one that is a little bit tricky right now because of the state of things in the world, but for culturally responsive teaching, parental and family involvement can be incredibly beneficial. So just outside of the classroom, and especially this works great for younger kids, encourage the students to talk to their parents, not just about their day to day, but their background. And then also reach out to the parents yourself. And, you can have them share things like their kids' favorite words or something that they do for holidays. But I also love this tip that I read in, it is called Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And she suggests to start an art on loan program where you ask the parents to lend a painting or a work of art that represents their culture or their family that they have in the house, and you borrow it for the classroom for the week and showcase it. And it's such a beautiful, amazing concept of bringing the home life into the classroom, but also exposing the rest of the class to this brand new culture and the way that this one student lives, etc. So I think that is just it's a neat idea and can be applied to digital mediums as well. If you ask parents to send in a picture of something that's relevant, you can use it as your Zoom background. But yeah, so art on loan, parental involvement. Okay, so I'm gonna take a moment. I wanted to show you this video of, it's sort of the results of a year of culturally responsive teaching in this Washington school. And these are second graders. And I was just blown away by not just their straightforward responses, but the choices, the words that they've chosen to describe their year and themselves. And it's quite fascinating. So I'm going to swap over for a minute.
Culturally responsive teaching happens when I bridge the gap between what students learn in the classroom and with what they experience in their cultures and in their communities. The goal behind culturally responsive teaching is that students will develop their own voice and become academically successful, critically conscious forces of change in their communities. But before they can make some type of change in their communities, they first have to see themselves as having the ability to make some type of important change.
How I've changed was, at first I was actually on a first grade reading level, and now I'm on a fourth grade reading level. I wasn't a good reader, but I excelled in it, and I became great. At first I didn't know my multiplication, but now I do.
And what helped you?
Skip counting and repeat addition. I had to work hard in this class so when I grow up, when I know enough, I can help people that don't have no home. I can give them food, and I might even start helping people by...
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just realized this audio was a little bit low, so I'm just going to back it up a touch. I'm sorry.
Change was, at first I was actually on a first grade reading level, and now I'm on a fourth grade reading level. I wasn't a good reader, but I excelled in it, and I became great. At first I didn't know my multiplication, but now I do.
And what helped you?
Skip counting and repeat addition. I had to work hard in this class so when I grow up, when I know enough, I can help people that don't have no home. I can give them food, and I might even start helping people by opening up a shelter.
Because I want to get an education. I want to be really smart, like you, Mr. Lancaster.
The reason why I work so hard in this class, is so I can go to college and get my education.
What do you want to do when you grow up?
I want to be a dance teacher.
Oh, really?
I don't waste this opportunity because kids wanted to be in school, but it was segregated, and they did all of that for us so we can go to school.
I work so hard in this class because I want to become a teacher, but I have to still work hard because if I don't work hard, I don't get paid when I work.
Why do I work hard in the class? Because Another person could be in my seat. Some of our big girls in this class are becoming a great leader, going to the third grade, and going to college. What's so important about being a leader is you have to have integrity.
It's important to have great character because in life, like when you go to college, you're gonna have like a hard time, and you have to have a good character because people in college don't tolerate nonsense. Nonsense.
I think that Ruby Bridges changed her community by going to a white school, even though her teacher was white, but her teacher still will help her, and the white people outside will just be mean to her, and I think she made a change because she kept going to a white school. Someone who I've learned about is Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, what'd he do?
He changed his community so black people can do some things that white people can do.
Yeah, Morgan is the man who saw the accident with the boogie in the car. So he decided the solution was he decided to make signals.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. he made important changes by bringing black and white people together.
Thurgood Marshall changed his community by he argued until black people was treated fairly as white people.
People are always just throwing stuff around and never recycling.
I want to fix that. People are getting killed, and I want to fix that by becoming a police or a secret agent.
The problem I see in my community is most black men killing other black men. And how I can help change my community by to tell them not to kill black men or women.
I want to help by telling people to do the right thing, and I want them to be inspired by me because I can show them the way, and leaders show others the way.
So I wanted to focus on specifically what those young people just said, because I think it is an incredible departure from, when I was a kid. If you asked me what I had learned in the year, I'm not sure what I would even be able to tell you. And in fact, it's a hard thing for adults to do, if we're being frank with ourselves. Reflection is a difficult thing for human beings to sit down and work with. And these are 6 and 7-year-olds who, when prompted, are just like, oh, well, you know what? I took agency with my education this year. I learned how to do this. I learned what a leader is. And they're not really parroting things that their teachers are saying. They're reflecting on themselves, and they're reflecting on the world around them. So they're developing this empathy at a level that is sort of otherwise not really seen. And I think that is incredible. So this was a big basis for why I support culturally responsive teaching, because you are starting at this fundamental base and you're building incredible things with it. Having kids realize at 6 that they want to be a leader because they want to inspire people, and actually being able to tangibly feel that and explain that to others is amazing. And again, when I was in 2nd grade, if you asked me what a leader was, I would probably mumble something and then say, hey, I want to go play on my Game Boy. We'll talk later. And these kids are enthusiastic. They have a legitimate answer. So that is just a great representation of culturally responsive teaching. Let me get back to my presentation here. Okay, so that was sort of the background. I want to talk about visual mediums. So some of these, I picked these specifically because not only are they very familiar in the STEM teaching arena, but they are all open source and they are free, and they're accessible, which is my number one look for in a software. So this is an example of Canva. Canva is wonderful for graphic arts, actually video editing on a really basic level. And a common usage for it would be creating an expressive poster, so protesting posters or showcasing something that's going on in the community, building awareness, storytelling, which is a little bit more advanced and can create these really, really powerful projects where you're actually having the student reflect on something that's important to them and then pushing that out into the world. And then finally, all of those things combined can actually help out with social media and outreach for your students. And I really love the idea of encouraging your projects to not remain in the classroom, but to bring them and push them out into the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example of a Canva-based whole multimedia experience that was done by a young Girl Scout that I work with named Daisy Hampton. During the virtual switch in, say, April, she realized that a lot of her classmates and peers were having difficulty following along with not just the curriculum, but the classes in general, because they didn't have access to computers. They didn't really have stable internet. They weren't able to stop and actually sit and go on a class at all. So she wanted to create a nonprofit that would bridge the digital divide for students who do not traditionally have access to these things. So this is actually something, sorry, this is something that she actually created with me in Canva, and this is showcasing her nonprofit. So everything she's done has been using Canva, using Wix to create her website and do outreach, and she's actually reached all the way to Mississippi Delta. So she has it's a peer-to-peer mentorship program now, and she has a slew of volunteers, of mentors, and they have now mentees. They just started their classes about 2 weeks ago. They started their mentor meetings. So she spent her pandemic time building this nonprofit, reaching out to others, and learning a little bit about graphic design, which is super cool, I think.
Hi, my name is Daisy Hampton. I am an 11-year-old living in New York City. I'm fighting for equity in my community by founding my nonprofit organization, Including You. All kids should feel safe, secure, and supported in their classroom, and that's not always the case. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when we started remote learning, another disparity became clear to me. Kids experiencing homelessness or who came from under-resourced homes were suddenly deprived of the opportunity to learn. They simply didn't have the computers and or the internet access needed to be educated online. I tried to think of a solution. How can we come together and create a supportive place where everyone can feel safe, secure, and seen? A place where we are all included. Through Including You, kids who volunteer to be mentors are paired up with younger kids who experience disparities because of learning differences, developmental or physical disabilities, or economic disparities. We can laugh and learn together.
So that was her project, so to speak, but it is actually this thing she's incredibly passionate about. And due to this outreach and due to her, learning the graphic design, starting her own social media platforms, she actually just, she has her own mentee who is this young woman named Laura. And they just met this past Friday to have an interview and a hangout session. And I think they carved pumpkins. It was this whole really cool thing. But she also ended up getting in contact with the rapper Fetty Wap, and Fetty Wap recorded a message for Laura, her mentee. So Laura wants to become a rapper, and he sent her this amazing video encouraging her, and it was so inspiring and so cool. And this was all done using Canva and social media. So take your students' passions outside of the classroom. They're kids, they love TikTok already. But if you encourage them to really push themselves and, reach out to local community leaders, reach out to Fetty Wap, the results are surprising and just incredibly encouraging. I want to talk a little bit about the design process too. So I think this is in the wrong spot, I'm sorry. So for the design process for not just the social media, the storytelling, but for app design as well. What I like to do is encourage the students to create a physical draft first. So, and this applies to any kind of project that you're doing. So if you're a math teacher, if you're a science teacher, just really getting into that documentation with the students, I think is so crucial because again, they get that log of all of their process and their achievements as well as their failures. Because, you know, we live in this society where we're trying to push risk taking more and more and more on our students in terms of education, and they can say, oh well, you know what, I put this beam in the wrong spot and it didn't work, but I learned that if I go back and measure it at this other angle, I get a better fit. So it's all part of the process. So physical drafts are really important, whatever form they may take. Digital drafts follow the physical draft, again, just so that they can develop different skills. This can take the form of like wireframing, or if you're doing maker activities, fritzing for schematics, and even just storyboarding, you know, transforming from the physical to the digital not only helps them retain their information, but also brainstorm on their ideas. So they can reflect and say, yeah, well, you know, I drew this here, but it doesn't really fit. And oh, what if I add this other part that I didn't even think of earlier? So it's just really key to have that design process. And then development and implementation comes after. So in terms of blueprints, wireframing, and drafts, I would say there's a pretty decent distinction between younger and older learners and the various benefits of the design styles. So younger students are developing crucial motor skills in addition to exploring the limitlessness of their own minds, whereas older students are given an opportunity to really practice and fine-tune their critical thinking skills, allowing for development of independence and confidence. Human beings equipped with these skills are able to push the envelope and become their own vehicles for change and innovation. So again, just having them sit down like legit architects and scientists and sketch out what they're doing and be a part of their own process is very, very key. Wireframing, back to that. So you're going to design a presentation style, and this applies to schematics too. I just picked wireframing because it's pretty easy visual. You can make a grid, and then you add in like the little details. And I'm going to have all of these slides. Everything will be available on my blog. I'm just going to send everybody a link because there are a lot of them. So switch over to computer science mediums. So again, three pretty widespread tools that I think a lot of people are familiar with: Tinkercad, App Lab, and App Inventor. So for Tinkercad, again, this was with a Girl Scout troop I worked with. We were working on a design project for our robotics presentation for the first LEGO League, and they wanted to design an accessible community space. So this was a mix of creating an environment that was welcoming to people that have disabilities, but also transforming a current park to be beneficial to the neighborhood and the community. So one of their coolest ideas was actually a kinetic swing. And this is the Tinkercad model for that swing. So while Tinkercad I think is often used for like creating things that are 3D printed, I think it's also an amazing digital blueprint medium for creating these bigger, giant community ideas as well. And also, again, very accessible. So this particular model used a piezo and an LED, and we 3D printed the swing set. And this is not the final design. I couldn't for the life of me find the final design picture. But when you swung the swing, you tapped on the the element, the piezo element, and then the LED would light up. So they presented it as, if we add these kinetic energy systems to this park, we can actually develop free energy for the neighborhood, and then the community would benefit, which was really cool. So that's kind of a new use for Tinkercad, is designing community-based projects and then modeling them. I think that the playground thing is pretty common, but paired with simple circuits, maker tools, it can be a really powerful and awesome project. I did a class last year on app design, and this was a community-based app design class, and one of the Girl Scouts pitched a climate app where users would be given resources, how they can better contribute to recycling, green programs in their neighborhood, but also it would be equipped with a notification system that would remind people to recycle or to do one good green habit per day. And this was created by this was the brainchild of, she was 8 years old. So it's just this really great environment for promoting their creativity and also causing them to be thoughtful about what the world around them needs. And then finally, this was also a STEM Kids NYC specialty. This was App Lab, not MIT App Inventor, but App Lab in code.org. And this student created a mental health app that was meant to provide a resource to students in her school. So they could do check-ins, they could share stories. There was resources and links. There is resources and links for people that are in need, or just to inform people about different mental health diagnoses and how you could better work with someone that experienced any mental health issues, etc. But it was this really amazing community type project, and it was also beautifully coded. It was really nicely done. Okay, and then I'm just going to touch on digital storytelling really quickly. This works amazing for not just social justice issues, but for if you are doing like a physical hands-on project, you can storytell the process of that. It really gives the students a lot of power to be able to reflect, like, again, from the beginning of their project to the end of their project. And it also is a great way to showcase the individual student. So, they can tell a story about something that happened in their lives or something that's important to their family. And they can do it in either like a comic type form or they can do it in a video form. But all of those digital mediums, Scratch is great for this too, if you have littler learners. It's just a wonderful way to allow the students to spotlight things that they care about. And I'm going to touch quickly on physical bills. I didn't want to put a ton of emphasis on this because, again, it's just, we have a lot of people that are virtual purely, etc. But my favorite activity to do with a group when I first start working with them is to ask them what kind of problems they have. So this is a really interesting project to scale up and down. So for example, when I'm working with younger students like early elementary, I will ask them if they have to do any chores and what kind of chores they do and which one they dislike the most. And then you kind of build up from there. So you're starting to get them to recognize issues in the world and then reflect on those issues and then try to fix those issues. Obviously, with like high school students, you can work on these really bigger, more tangible community and world related projects, but it's always just a fun, quick activity to kind of get the scope of, what your kids are thinking about right away. And then finally, I wanted to showcase this woman, Beatrice Cortez. So she is an artist, and I'm absolutely fascinated with her work, and she incorporates making and physical computing into her art, and they're actually also these very big cultural statement pieces. And unfortunately, I found out about her after we sort of shut down and went into virtual mode, but I would love, as soon as I'm back in the makerspace again, to do one of these projects with my maker kiddos. So I'm going to show you a quick intro.
I have two pieces in the exhibition in Mundos Alternos. One is a collaboration that I have with also LA-based artist Rafa Esparza. It's titled Nomad 13, and it's a piece that evokes a space traveling capsule with plants that are nutritious and that have spiritual value to indigenous peoples in the Americas. And it includes adobe, a floor made with adobe, and a sholot, or a dog that's a spiritual deity for the Aztecs, and that symbolically protects the plants as they travel through a threshold to another dimension or another space. And then I have the memory insertion capsule, which is my own project, and that piece is an installation that it's on the one hand a space that evokes a home, a space capsule, a helmet with an obsolete version of virtual reality in it. I'm interested in inviting the viewers to explore an archive that is part of my own practice as a scholar, to look at archives and as an artist, but also it's also an adventure to look at an archive and think about the meaning of all these things that you find when you don't know their connection, when you don't know where they come from, and they're not organized in a specific way. So that adventure is part of the trip that you can take by wearing this helmet.
So the main project I wanted to show you folks was actually this one. So this is the fortune teller machine, and this is an incredible maker project because it incorporates the culture of Guatemala with Arduinos, which I just was blown away. So the story behind me finding this artist, because I think it's kind of interesting, is, you know, I live in New York City, and I was walking back from actually my Girl Scouts robotics team meet, and I saw a forest in the middle of Midtown Manhattan in this building. And that is very unusual because it's Midtown Manhattan and it was this forest. So I ended up looking it up when I got home, figuring out what the heck was there. And it's actually the Ford Foundation for Social Justice. And they have this incredible, like, tree laden pond. And then off of the forest is an art gallery. So I had to go see this secret forest. So I walked in there one day and found these machines, and there's these boxes like this, but there's also a acrylic one that you can actually go in and see the guts. So I saw the Arduino and had an immediate nerd out. But when you press the button, what it does is it gives you a fortune in Cachica, which is a Guatemalan Mayan language. And then there's another one that gives it in English. And I thought this was just an incredible, incredible way of incorporating culture into maker culture, which it's often referred to. And this really inspired me to kind of incorporate um, more of my students' backgrounds into their creations, you know? So, for example, I'm now teaching second grade, and in our second grade math class, we're doing fractions. So of course, flags are the classic how to knock out fractions with that age group. And what I did was I gave them an engineering project where their design constraint was they had a predefined amount of fractal shapes, and then we reviewed some of their culture's flags. So I have one student who's from Portugal, and he's just like the cutest, sweetest little thing. And I put up the Portuguese flag, and he just lost his mind. He was so excited. And then when he was given his fractal pieces, he started recreating something totally different from the Portuguese flag. But he was so excited to stop and, you know, tell all of our friends in class, you know, oh, well, this is what it looks like. And it's almost 1/3, but not quite 1/3. It's a little bit bigger. And then there's the moon on top, kind of. And anyway, just incorporating these little bits of culture, although it's sort of the face of culturally responsive teaching, I think is just a really great way to squeeze in these little bits about our students. So I just wanted to showcase her because she's incredible. Yeah, so that is all that I have for you fine folks today. Does anybody have any questions, any comments? You guys are so quiet. See, I'm expecting like my kids, like, does anyone need to go to the bathroom? Because you go now before the end of class. No?
I'll ask a question if I could.
Of course.
Hey, thanks, Amanda. I'm curious, and you sort of touched on it, but I work with a lot of teachers who are either remote or hybrid in part, and trying to pull off project-based learning where there were traditional projects that they did hands-on, whether it was in a makerspace or maker-like at home, at school, building prototypes, paper models, things like that. So I'm just wondering if you have ideas for allowing or a teacher to facilitate the building at home and the capturing of constructing knowledge, and then bringing that into the classroom and back, or in digitally. Just anything that virtually would help teachers use this kind of construction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a really big tip that I've learned was to sort of predefine all the projects. Like unfortunately, maker projects are like they thrive on experimenting and kind of letting things go off the rails into whatever. But in this situation, I think if you can sort of set out what project you want to do and then have very specific materials and kits that you can send out to the students that they can also bring back. So what my school did was they actually have a learning box, and it has all the kids' supplies in it and like their specific maker box. So each kid would get like 70 wires and 4 AA batteries or what have you. And then the teacher would created this really cool device where they just popped a mirror on their webcam and then tilted the camera down, and they would build one by one with the students. And again, I will say, unfortunately, even with the most ideal conditions for making, it's not nearly as as conducive as it is physically in the classroom. But yeah, I would suggest like having kits. Also, if you can have your teachers pre-record some of the steps so that the students that are they might just not grasp one part as well as another part, they can actually just go back individually. And again, that this ties into the empowering themselves and realizing, oh, I think I need to check on this part. And then also having the students create their own journals of, like, even if they're just filming themselves. I found a lot of that back and forth video diary has been really, really helpful.
Yeah, I teach science in Phoenix, but we used Flipgrid. And I will say that I probably got more out of my kids using Flipgrid than any other part, because I think they could go in their bedroom, shut the door, and tell me and show me what they built. And so if you've never used Flipgrid, and you can either on that, either shut the link off so other kids can see it. And sometimes I just put it where it's private, depending on what the project is, so only I see it, but otherwise other friends can see it as well.
Yeah, I second Flipgrid. That is a fantastic contribution. Alrighty. Anybody else? Any questions?
All right, so if you are done, please make sure that you do the Padlet. I think the link was sent out to you guys. Make sure that you're filling that out as your exit tickets so that we can continue having those talks about culturally responsive initiatives. So, any other questions for our speaker today?
Can you just talk a little bit about how I gather your school is like a project-based learning school, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm curious about like, how do you thread in like skill development into like, so if they're doing like an open-ended project and they need to learn, I think you mentioned something about like how to use outside resources. And I'm just curious how you kind of manage that in terms of giving them an open-ended project, but also supporting them and developing certain skills that they would need in order to.
So like balancing the fundamental skills with the experimental skills. Yeah, absolutely. That's always an interesting challenge. So what we do is we have different units, so it's almost like semesters, but not really. So there's no homework and there's no testing. But what we do is during the day it's a very small school. And so each day is broken into like their themes. So like say our schedule right now would be math is in the morning, and then reading or literacy, and then we have a making or a science class, and then social studies and project time. So that's for our beginning unit. So we're touching on each individual skill, but we also have sort of an overall theme. So like I'll just break down my day because I think it's easier to explain it that way. So in the morning, for right now, I'm doing kind of a storytelling. Our unit theme is personality and developing a community sense of self, etc. So that's like that's our theme right now. That's the opening couple weeks. So in the morning, we do an activity. We do a morning meeting, and the kids share something about their lives, and they illustrate it, and then they write about it a little bit. They'll do like a diagram. And then in math, we are like right now I was just doing a geometric shapes unit and fractions. So to complement our overall unit, they're doing the basics, like there might be a couple mini Socratic sessions where we're talking about what shapes are. But then after a few minutes of that, we're jumping into Tinkercad, and the students are creating a model of a secret base that they would want to live in that incorporates things that they like. So like one of my students is all about her cat. So she built this amazing cat palace. But they're also learning about the geometric shapes. And then, so again, it's a very cohesive system. So you do a little bit of like sort of the traditional fundamental teaching, and then you tie that into the bigger project. So we're like not necessarily the bigger project, but the bigger theme. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I don't know if I explained that well. So like a little bit of fundamental teaching, and then you have a mini project that is complementing the fundamental teaching, but also complementing the theme of the unit. So in this case, they're doing geometric shapes, they're learning Tinkercad, and they're learning their CAD skills, and they're developing their sense of self by building a place that they can share with others that reflects their personality.
And is there a point in that arc where they're doing like a more of a student choice kind of project? That's another thing I'm thinking about a little bit is like when you do student choice, how do you support like all these different, if they're doing very different projects, like how do you support the skill development to support each of those?
So this is the unit I've described as like our introductory unit. So the first few weeks of the year, we're going to be moving into a very intense, just 2-week unit that has to do actually very much with a project I mentioned, where the students are going to be asked to create something that would help out the lives of another person. Now, for our kindergartners, they have a specific assignment. So the kindergartners are being asked to develop a method for their teacher to not have to take her bike to school. Like she has a transportation thing. So they have a direct problem they were given. My kids, who are the first and second graders, are going to be asked a little bit broader, but they're still going to be given like a narrow framework to work within. And then the older students are kind of given the whole like, okay, there's a lot of things going on in the community. What's a problem that you see? How are you going to fix it? So the way that works is essentially for my group, especially, they will be given a couple hours a day to just work on their project. And they will have support from me and 2 other classroom teachers and specialty teachers, but it's fully them. They're given it's a very much engineering design process style. So they have a set of constraints in terms of materials and the problem, and then they kind of have to work from there. We also will be spending a couple hours in the day going back and covering the fundamentals, and depending on their project, this may or may not cover also, like it may or may not fit in with their individual project. It might just be, they're doing adding double numbers one day and it doesn't have anything to do with their project, but they have to learn the double numbers. So it's a flexible system, but we try to be very cohesive.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, any last questions? All right, well, thank you guys all so much for attending. I appreciate you listening to me ramble. I'm not a straightforward chatter. So I hope that you found something useful. I hope that you enjoyed any of the resources that I mentioned. I'm going to put in a link right now. 1 second. That has all of the resources that I mentioned today, and also a lot of different articles, and actually the book that I mentioned, which is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. Those people can say the things that I've said much more eloquently and straightforward. So I hope that you check out those resources if you would like to read further. It also has a list of all of the digital tools and all that jazz I mentioned. Hang on, I'm finding it now. And I actually wish you all the best. Oh, sorry, wrong link. I always do that. Okay, that's in the chat now. And there's actually an attendee in here right now, Dr. Tevino. She's going to be hosting a meeting, a workshop tomorrow. I really highly recommend that you attend it. She's amazing and very, very brilliant and has amazing things to say. So thank you all so much, and I appreciate your watching. Have a great day.